and we're very pleased to have you here today. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the session. Alison, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you for everybody else for turning up. I'm going to talk for just under 20 minutes, Britt. I haven't quite had the skills to do a good sort of illustrations and things for that, and some of the subjects are a bit difficult to illustrate anyway. So if people will bear with me, I'm just going to talk and tell you go through the issues. The talk is being recorded, so you will be able to go back to it if you want to check up on anything. Anyway, just to start with, I'm a member of Global Justice Now, which was previously known as the World Development Movement. Their mission statement, if you'll forgive the jargon, is that we're a democratic social justice organisation working as part of a global movement to challenge the powerful and create a more just and equal world. We mobilise people in the UK for change and act in solidarity with those fighting injustice, particularly those in the global south. I will be talking about some of the campaigns that Global Justice Now and other organisations such as Jubilee Debt Campaign are running against the governments and multinational corporations who have such power over the economies of developing countries. Most of the information I'll be citing is drawn from their websites. Just a quick roundup of the main issues. We know that global warming is affecting weather patterns and creating extreme weather emergencies around the globe. Millions of people are being affected, and we are hearing some of their stories during this conference. Having looked at a number of reports and websites, this is a very quick summary. Starting in the north, the Arctic is shifting to a different climate, characterised less by ice and snow and more by open water. Sea ice has declined by 12% per decade. This is not just affecting polar bears, but also Inuit communities who are losing their ability to live off the land and communicate with their neighbours. Some communities have been forced to relocate, and this will affect the future of young people caught between the traditional and modern worlds and not fully adapted to either. There have been increased frequency and intensities of cyclones and hurricanes in the Pacific, Indian Ocean and Caribbean regions. In the Atlantic last year, 30 storms developed into 13 hurricanes, 6 major ones. This was the 5th successive year of above average intensity in the hurricane season. In Africa, there's been drought in the Horn of Africa and across the southern region, been flooding in East Africa and mudslides in Sierra Leone. 70% of the population of Africa grows its own food and will be affected by extreme weather conditions. There is a predicted need for 62% rise in electricity generation, which will require a move from coal to green energy sources to serve the population, increased population. In South America, research is revealing that the Andes glaciers have reduced 3 foot in thickness annually since 2000, which will affect the local water supplies. But conversely, there's an increased flooding risk in Central and South America from the Atlantic and Pacific weather patterns. 2020, there was a total of 25 severe weather events in Asia, including floods and typhoons impacting life in the Philippines, Bangladesh and Vietnam. In India, it's predicted that increases in summer temperature of 40 degrees centigrade could lead to a loss of effective outdoor working in the economy because of the higher temperatures and humidity. Territory of Oceania reported very early on that their land was at great risk from rising sea levels, with their population needing to rebuild and relocate. Australia lost 44.5 million acres to forest fires in 2020, and campaigners are not satisfied by Australian politicians' efforts in relation to their climate change targets. People in the Global South, however, are not just passive victims of this process. They understand how their typical climate and weather patterns are changing and have policy ideas as to how they might mitigate the worst effects. One of their difficulties lies in finding sources of finance to use on climate change projects, which do not come with crippling levels of interest and too many strings. The UN is the obvious institution which is trying to alleviate the worst consequences of war, famines, and natural disasters, but they rely on countries in the global north for funding, which is not always regularly forthcoming. All publicly available funds need to be supplemented from private sources. The UN-based Green Climate Fund is a new initiative which currently funds 129 projects with help from the private sector, but much more is required. The voluntary sector does its best as well, working at grassroots level. One example of what can be done is from Costa Rica, where 99.7% of their energy mix is renewable, thanks to a state-owned energy provider, which together with 4 rural energy cooperatives is also responsible for ensuring over 99% access to electricity by the population. Is an unusually high level for the global south. The notion of climate reparations from countries in the global north, who've historically been responsible for the greatest carbon emissions, countries in the global south, who will disproportionately have to bear the effects of global warming, has been hovering around the climate change conferences and debates without anyone with power and influence really willing to take them seriously. The term was invented by Maxine Burkett, a law professor in the University of Hawaii in 2009, who recognized the issue as an injustice that needed to be addressed in law and policy. The issue is taken up by Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, after extensive flooding in his country, for which he blamed not nature, but big carbon emitters like the United States. He proposed that northern countries should donate 1% of their annual GDP to a UN fund for poorer countries in recognition of their responsibility. It was raised at the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, but unsurprisingly, no decisions were taken. It's still a concept that has considerable resonance, but the level of borrowing undertaken last year in this by northern countries to safeguard their economies will provide another alibi for not responding to these proposals. Global Justice Now's approach to supporting countries in the global south to deal with climate change is to campaign against the processes and institutions originating in the global north, which reduce the amount of national income that countries have to spend on their at-risk communities, and any trade policies which reduce their freedom of action. One of the foremost issues is that of debt repayment. Global Justice Now supports the Jubilee Debt Campaign, which lobbies for cancellation of global South debt or restructuring of it into more transparent terms. A new round of loans to countries in the global south started in 2008 from banks, private investors, hedge funds, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, who'd either been bailed out or done rather well out of the financial emergency and were thus flushed with cash. Many of them were making loans to African countries, particularly focusing on commodity extraction. Paying the interest on these loans has become harder for these countries to manage, particularly those whose economies have been affected by climate emergencies and now the pandemic. The UK is responsible for much of this lending, with 70% of publicly traded loans to Africa governed by UK law. The COVID-19 pandemic has made the situation much worse for those countries whose economies have been hard hit by the stoppage of tourism and other trade. Our Chancellor so far sees no problem in the UK paying interest on the huge amount of borrowing we've undertaken both last year and this. While interest rates are low to us and our credit worthiness is high, others are not so well placed. At least 52 countries at present are in severe difficulty with their debt repayments, compared to 22 in 2015. These include Angola, Zambia, Lebanon, Gambia, Chad, and Tunisia. A further 25 countries are at risk of public and private debt problems. These countries are obliged to make interest payments to global north countries and institutions which in many cases is more than the money they have to spend on health and education for their own citizens. This forced outflow of cash traps them in a situation where they cannot use this income to mitigate the effects of climate change and respond to emergencies in ways they would wish. Zambia, for example, has just requested restructuring of its debt repayments, which has been refused by their creditors. These payments have increased from 4% of their GDP in 2014 to 33% in 2020, which would create difficulties for any country. Private lenders account for the majority of their debt, which is often short-term and high interest, much the same as the payday loan companies who prey on our own poor in this country. Countries cannot go bankrupt, and they remain prey to what's called vulture funds, companies who can buy up their debt and trade it, like those who speculated on US mortgages in 2008. When the pandemic started, there were calls for debt repayments to be cancelled, and it was agreed by G7 countries that their national loans would be suspended, but not written off. But private creditors were not involved in this arrangement and are not bound by it. Chad and Ethiopia, along with Zambia, are considering debt restructuring, but 52% of their debt is to private lenders. New York lawmakers are currently proposing a change in US law where the majority investors can agree to debt restructuring by other countries, which other private institutions have to be bound by. Jubilee Debt is campaigning for a similar law change in the UK. In the UK, the Parliamentary International Development Select Committee published a report on the 20th of January calling for the government to act on the COVID-19 debt crisis and pushed for private lenders to be part of global debt initiatives and for debtor countries to have protection under UK law. Overseas aid. Overseas aid should potentially be another source of grant aid, allowing countries in the global south to develop ways of offsetting the effects of climate change. In the UK, however, since the Conservatives came to power in 2010, the whole policy and direction of the aid budget has been distorted, with far less transparency on how it is being spent and with much less focus on alleviating poverty. Changes made have had the outcome of more money going to private sector sources and being spent in ways that have brought the whole sector into public disrepute and made it an easy target for redistribution and reduction and redistribution. We might have been spending 0.7% of our GDP, but increasingly this was designed to benefit more of our own national priorities than anybody else's. It is a growing scandal. More of the aid budget during these years since 2010 was funneled through the UK Development Bank, the CDC group, with large amounts going into fossil fuel investments and a $500 million promotion of private healthcare and private hospitals in countries in Africa and Asia who have a crying need for publicly funded healthcare. Global Justice published a report recently exposing this misdirection of funds towards the government's preferred private sector solutions for every problem. In December last year, however, with the impending 2021 COP26 climate change conference due to be hosted in Glasgow, the government decided to better clean up its act and announced an end to overseas public finance for fossil fuel initiatives. This had been one of Global Justice's campaigns, so this was welcome as far as it goes. The US is now following suit, with President Biden calling a halt to Trump's shameless federal funding for American oil companies, who are not obviously short of a bob or two. There have also been useful campaigns by shareholders against HSBC Bank, which is the largest funder of fossil fuel initiatives abroad in the South, with a resolution demanding disinvestment by the bank in these projects due to be voted on at its AGM in April. They were the target of another campaign by Global Justice a few years back, who dumped a large symbolic load of coal outside their bank headquarters. However, with the abolition of the Department for International Development and the incorporation of international development themes into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Global Justice are campaigning for a better focused use of the proposed 0.5 budget. Current government proposals are to link foreign policy objectives to aid, which would finally destroy any notion of poverty reduction as an outcome of foreign aid. We have been publishing papers describing what a properly targeted aid budget should look like. We did take the government to court in 1990 for a really bad use of the aid budget overseas. It's not impossible to try again. There is an email link on the Global Justice website for a call to Boris to stop hijacking the aid budget. Properly used grant aid should be part of the support packages to helping countries mitigate their climate change effects. The other area where Global Justice is campaigning is around trade deals affecting countries in the global south. Global Justice has a paper entitled 4 Reasons Why Modern Trade Deals Are Terrible for the Climate. These days, trade deals are not just about tariffs. They also focus on public policies like food standards and energy regulation, which can have a big impact on climate change. Number one, trade deals are powerful and can override climate treaties because they are enforceable with penalties for non-compliance. Climate treaties, as we well know, have targets and goals, but no legal enforcement. 2, trade deals can make the climate change worse. They can actively encourage trade in dirty fossil fuels, as for example, Canada used the negotiations on the EU-Canada trade deal to insist that the EU continued importing tar sands oil from them, overriding a regulation which would stop this. 3, trade deals can block climate action. To achieve change, we need strong binding government regulations, such as the phasing out of carbon-based cars by a set date. But trade rules are written to prioritise voluntary self-regulation. 4, if a country passes meaningful regulation on climate change, they could be challenged by another country or corporation on the grounds of restricting its operations. Trade deals can allow corporations to sue governments directly in what are known as the corporate courts. If a trade deal includes a provision allowing companies to resort to these courts, which are known as international state dispute settlement, that will enable the company to sue a country in an international tribunal if it's introduced laws which might restrain the free action of the multinational company. Such legal actions have been prompted by countries reducing use of fossil fuels, reducing water prices, and also introducing anti-smoking messages on cigarette packets. One example is the oil company Occidental, who sued Ecuador in South America over cancellation of an oil concession and won $1.8 billion damages, which was equivalent to Ecuador's entire annual health budget and had to be paid by them. Global Justice campaigns for greater scrutiny of trade deals, like the UK-US one and the forthcoming Trans-Pacific Partnership, and opposes the inclusion of these clauses allowing recourse to ISDS, these dispute courts, as part of the deal. We were campaigning actively against a proposed Trump US-UK deal because of its implications for food and health provisions. And thankfully, this is now lower down the American agenda at the moment and might be more thoughtful if and when negotiations begin. We have been campaigning for Parliament to have the final say on trade deals, with sympathetic peers in the Lords introducing amendments to the trade bill, and more MPs are starting to support this. The government, however, currently does not want this at all and has had to resort to shameless parliamentary trickery to avoid attracting negative votes. You can get more information, background information on all these issues from the Global Justice Now and the Jubilee Debt Campaign websites, and sign up for email campaigns with your MP. Our main hope must be that the exposure of the extreme inequalities in our world and society by the pandemic will start to force change, and the pressure of impending climate change will also start to kickstart the creation of a better and more sustainable world. Thank you.